I apologize, everybody, for being late. We're having technical difficulties. I use a restreaming service to broadcast to multiple locations, and let's just say I've had a hard time so far. I've been working on this since, 6:30 my time. So I've done 40 minutes just trying to get the live stream up and working, and I think we've finally got it. So thank you for your patience. Thank you for all the work, and it would be great. I'm going to ask you to do something for me if you can. Share this information. I look at the numbers, and I've got some shares, and I'm happy with what I got. But I think we've got a lot of really good information, and I would love to see that information shared farther and wider. So please, head to the website, constitutionstudy.com. I did have something interesting happen earlier this week. My Monday video got flagged. Now I'm trying to figure out why it got flagged, because Facebook just doesn't want to tell me, and I'm disputing the flagging. But if you want to not worry about Facebook or Google or YouTube or Twitter or anybody blocking me, or go to the website, constitutionstudy.com. I don't have the live stream working yet. I tried it once. I'm still working on it. But the live streams don't show up on the website. They show up as recordings later. They are there. But I'm trying to get the live stream software to work on my website so that you too can watch from there, and we can avoid dealing with some of these people. I appreciate all the support I get. There's sometimes I'm here, it's just me, myself, and I in the office, and it gets a little dreary. So we'll persevere. I've got an interesting discussion today. It actually comes from a question. So 2 things I want to mention. If you have questions, please put them in the chat. Everything in the chat I will try to answer. Unlike other times, I don't really have a set, like a presentation I want to do. Usually I have presentations with quotes, and I'm trying to get through. Today is going to be a little bit more off the cuff, which, well, personally, I find to be a lot of fun. Hopefully you enjoy it as well. But that also means I can get to your questions, and we can have a much better back and forth. Now, I have one gentleman who's on my actual Zoom call. If you want to actually talk to me on these events, go to the website, constitutionstudy.com/live. You can register for the live event there, and you will get a link to a Zoom meeting where we can actually talk and interact and be involved. It's another way to get involved and not worry about everybody else. So that's cool. What was the other thing? Oh, yes, one other thing. This Saturday, I'm doing a webinar on presidential elections. Now, hang on, put the duct tape down. I know you're like me. You're probably just so fed up with the presidential elections and all that you just don't want to hear it anymore. But I've been seeing and reading and hearing about a lot of inaccurate and just bad information about the Constitution, how we elect a president, what the process is, what happens if there are problems. Believe it or not, there are mechanisms in the Constitution to deal with what happens if a state doesn't get its election counted on time, or what happens if there's a dispute in the state about an election. There's actually processes in that. So I'm going to be going through the actual process of the presidential election, not what we were taught in school, how it actually is supposed to work, some of the pros and cons too. I'm going to be talking about the fact that we don't really have an electoral college, but what people call the electoral college, why we have it, why it's actually important, what happens when the problems. And actually, we're going to talk a lot about some of the things where the states are either not following the Constitution, or they're kind of paying lip service to it. So there's a lot we're going to be talking about. It'll be about an hour and a half, and that will be this Saturday, the 24th. I believe it's at 1 p.m. Central Time. Now, if you can't make it, register anyway. If you register, I will send you a link to the recording probably sometime around Tuesday. Give me some chance to maybe clean up some edits or whatever and get it uploaded. So you can actually, even if you can't make it live, please sign up and you can watch this. You can watch that. I think it's going to be very interesting. If you've watched me for a little period of time, I'm not talking politics. We're not talking, rhinos and dinos. We are going to be talking the Constitution. So with that, let's talk about let's talk about tonight's subject, which is amending state constitutions. And as I said, if you have a question, put it in the chat and I will read it here and we'll work on it. But if you have a question outside of these live streams, go to the website and ask a question. Today's message, today's content started from a question from a friend of mine, someone that I've met, and we've done some constitutional work together. And he had a question about amending state constitutions, and it kind of got, we started talking about it and thinking about it. And I decided, you know what, it's probably worth talking about. So that's what we're going to do this evening, is we're going to talk about it. And what I actually did, since I don't study all 50 state constitutions, what we're actually going to do is I picked 4 states, and we're going to look at some of their constitutions and how they're amended and why they're amended that way, and the good, the bad, maybe the ugly, and we can figure out, maybe get some insight for ourselves and our own state. Brian, I thank you for loving the YouTube channel. Brian, I love doing podcasts. I will talk to just about anybody that wants to have a reasonable conversation about the Constitution. I live in a small town, actually I live in a small town outside a slightly larger town in Middle Tennessee. And I found there's a guy in that town that has a podcast. He has a video on Facebook, and he's had me on a couple times. We have a great time. I love it. All right, so let's talk a little bit about amending state constitutions. Now, we are all hopefully familiar with the process of amending the federal constitution. So we're going to compare it to that. But I want to back up just a wee bit and ask, really, why? I mean, what's the purpose of amending constitutions? I mean, it seems rather obvious, but yes, the point is, it's in order to change the Constitution. We have people who say, oh, it's a living, breathing document, and well, yes and no. It's living and breathing in the fact that it can be changed, but it's not living and breathing in the way most people use it today, meaning it's whatever 5 of the 9 justices on the Supreme Court says it means. So the purpose of amending the Constitution is to change the Constitution, because constitutions are not simply law. Justice Marshall from the Marbury versus Madison court opinion wrote, certainly all those who have framed written constitutions contemplate them as forming the fundamental and paramount law of the nation. A constitution is a fundamental law. It forms the government. Right? No, it doesn't say, it's not just, it's the law. It's the forming of a government. It is the paramount law. It's special. Now, the Articles of Confederation, those of you remember a little bit of history, right? We had the Declaration of Independence. Then we had the Articles of Confederation, and they did not have an amendment process. There was no way to change legally the Articles of Confederation. So when they found that there were problems, they got back together and said, we're stuck. Now, a lot of people will say, well, it was illegal when they wrote the Constitution. I've heard all that. The brass tacks are, there was no way to amend the Articles of Confederation. That's why we wrote a new Constitution, and why they wrote it with an Article 5 that allows us to change the Constitution. But notice, it's not just to allow us to change the Constitution. It controls how we change the Constitution. It didn't dawn on me at first until I was pondering this. It's just as important to understand how we change the Constitution as is to know that we can and how we have changed it. And we'll talk a little bit as we compare the U.S. Constitution to several of these state constitutions. But it's things like, well, who's actually allowed to propose amendments? We're going to think about that. What's the importance about the different ways that amendments are proposed, but more importantly, how, who is allowed to propose, who's allowed to suggest a change to this fundamental document. And we're dealing, and I'm using the U.S. Constitution as kind of our starting point, but we're going to look at 4 of the state constitutions. So it's literally how your state government was formed, the powers your state government has been delegated, what they can and cannot do, who decides to propose what changes can be made. Of course, then you have, well, who actually approves the amendments? How is it ratified? Who is allowed to participate in the changing of this fundamental document? If you follow sports, now, I used to follow football. I don't really much anymore. My big thing's been auto. All my life, I've followed auto racing. And, you've got certain core rules that are always there. And then you have certain things they change from year to year. They change, some of the specifications for the cars or how they're going to handle yellow flags. How that goes about is important. And if you're talking about a fundamental government function, how you change that, who gets to approve those changes, it becomes very important. And there's one other thing that kind of catches my attention: the idea of amendments versus revisions. Now, back when I lived in upstate New York, I tried, with minimal success, to read the New York State Constitution. I say with minimal success for two reasons. One is it was written in legalese. This was lawyers writing it, and it was horrible to read. It was, picture, that party, the first part to the party, the second part, third removed. It was all that stuff. It drove me crazy. It was so, I'd have to read a clause and then map out what it actually said, because it was just nuts. But the other thing is, the New York Constitution, if memory serves, at least what I read, was not amended, it was revised, meaning you'd go back and change the original language. Now, if you've read the U.S. Constitution, we don't revise the U.S. Constitution, we amend it, which is why we still have an 18th Amendment. We still have prohibition in the Constitution. Sure, it was repealed, and I think it was 21st Amendment, but the document is still there. The words are still there. And to me, that's actually quite important. And again, I'm a teacher at heart. So to me, it's a teaching opportunity to look at it. Okay, there was a point in time when we decided as a nation, we were going to prohibit the sale and manufacture of alcohol. Why? And the fact that we said, you know what, that's a bad idea. We're going to turn that off. We're going to repeal that. Why? To me, it's also an excellent example of how these governments are supposed to work. I heard there's a gentleman, Rick Green, use the example of a bucket with a lid on it. And when we created the Constitution, we created a bucket and we put powers into that bucket and we stuck a lid on it. These are the powers of the federal government, and that's it. 27 times since then, we have opened the lid of the bucket. 26 of those times we put a power in. One time we took a power out. So at some point we had to say, okay, we're going to open up the bucket. We're going to give the government the authority to regulate out the sale and manufacture of alcohol. And then we came back and said, nah, we're going to take some of that power back. So amendments versus revisions, to me, again, that's pretty cool. But all right, let's talk a bit more about amendments. Now, there's two parts, at least every place I've seen, well, with a slight exception. Right? Generally, I just realized I almost tripped myself up. Generally, there are two parts to actually amending the Constitution. You have proposing amendments, and you have ratifying amendments. You have a suggestion, and you have a confirmation. The interesting thing is, in the constitutions that I've read, once an amendment is ratified, once it's approved, it becomes part of the Constitution, it becomes a permanent part of the Constitution. Now, U.S. Constitution, Article 5, we read a couple things. There are two entities that can propose amendments, either Congress or a convention of the states. They're the only two entities that are allowed to propose amendments to the Constitution. Now, if Congress, which by the way is the only way we've proposed amendments so far, if Congress is going to propose an amendment, it requires a 2/3 vote of each house. 2/3 of the House, 2/3 of the Senate. That's to get the proposal out there. Now, if they're going to do a convention, 2/3 of the state legislatures have to request a convention. right? So again, the number 2/3, we're looking at 2/3 of different things. You get 2/3 of the 435 House members have to vote on it, and 2/3 of the 100 senators have to vote on the same language. Then that gets sent to the states. Now, the state legislatures can say, hey, we want to propose amendments too. 2/3 of the state legislatures have to pass legislation that says we want a convention. Then Congress deals with scheduling the convention. But those are the only two ways the United States amendment can be proposed, or those two. Now, the first of the states that I looked at is my current home state, Tennessee. Hey, I'm a volunteer. I figured this is a good place to start. And in the Tennessee Constitution, it's Article 11 that controls amending the Constitution. Now, I'm not going to quote all this stuff. I didn't create a bunch of quotes because I thought it'd be boring. But here's what it says. The legislature can propose amendments. So we have our legislature, the General Assembly, by a simple majority of each house. Right? So a majority of the General Assembly, a majority of the Senate. If they both vote on the language, then there's an amendment to the Constitution proposed. But they make it a little trickier because it has to be a simple majority of each house, but in 2 consecutive General Assemblies. All right, so like every 2 years, we elect new General Assembly, just like every 2 years we elect a new House and Congress. So it's not just we have to convince these guys. You have to get it passed in this General Assembly and in the next. It has to be exactly the same language. It's basically, they come in and there are rules about it being read and all that. But basically, someone proposes an amendment. It gets voted on by the House. It gets voted on by the General Assembly. It gets voted on by the Senate. They then hold it till next year. It gets read to the new General Assembly. It gets voted on. It gets voted on the Senate. Once it's done twice, voila. Now we have a proposed amendment to the state constitution. Now, the legislature can also propose a convention. And what I found interesting is they can call up a convention to, quote, alter, reform, or abolish this Constitution, or to alter, reform, or abolish any specified part of it. That's Section 3, Clause 2, if you're interested. Now, I found this interesting. See, when you read the state constitutions, every state constitution I've looked at so far has language along the lines of all power is inherent in the people. We hold the power. We delegate some of that power to our state government when we create the Constitution, which created the government. And what I find interesting here is it reminded me that a convention, now granted the legislature calls it a convention, but the purpose is to alter, reform, or abolish the Constitution or a part of the Constitution. Why do I find that thing? Well, remember, alter, reform, or abolish. The people of the state of Tennessee have the legal authority to wipe out its government and constitute a new one because we have the ability to abolish our current Constitution. And to me, that just caught as another reminder that it is we, the people. Josh is asking, can we, the people, propose an amendment? Not to the U.S. Constitution. We, the people, there is no mechanism for the people to amend the U.S. Constitution. And I believe there's very good reason for that. And we're going to talk a little bit more as we get into some of the other states and how they go about it. But at the federal level, the U.S. Constitution, remember, the people of the United States are not parties to the U.S. Constitution. The states are the parties. The people created the states, and the states created the United States. Think of it this way, right? Google's been in the news a lot lately. There's a lawsuit being filed against them. The owners of Google, the people that own the stock of what's called Alphabet, they create a company called Alphabet. That company has another company called Google. That's kind of the way it works, right? We don't directly, we are not direct parties to the Constitution of the United States. We are direct parties to the Constitution of our state, and our state governments are parties to the Constitution of the federal government, of the Constitution of the United States. So that's a good question, Josh. It's interesting. We're going to see some more as we get, because actually it's the very next thing on my list. Within the state of Tennessee, there is no option for the people to directly propose an amendment. So just like the U.S. Constitution, the people can't say, hey, we want an amendment. We have to go through our representatives, the people we hire to represent us, the people we hire to execute our power in our name. We have to tell them, no, we need you to either propose an amendment or to call a convention so that we can propose amendments. That's the only way in the state of Tennessee we, the people, can actually propose amendments, is through a convention. And even that's not direct, because you're going to elect representatives to go to the convention, right? Hopefully that's clear as mud. Now, the next state I looked at was California. Now, Tennessee is a fairly Republican state, so I wanted a heavily Democratic state. I wanted the juxtaposition. Tennessee has some very blue cities in it. So Nashville, Knoxville, Memphis tends to be very much more Democratic, but the rest of the state's much more Republican. So let's look at difference, right? But I also picked California for another reason. Now, the California Constitution, it's Article 18 that controls the amendment process. Now, again, the legislature can propose an amendment by 2/3 vote. Now notice, in Tennessee, it was majority vote of 2 legislatures, right? The current and the next General Assembly. In California, it's simply a 2/3 vote of the legislature. You get 2/3 of both houses of the legislature. Voila, you can put an amendment on the ballot. Now, the legislature can also propose a convention to revise the Constitution. And I found this interesting. Again, as I went through some of these states, this is going to become interesting as we get a little farther on, as we start looking at some of the other states. So again, we still have 2 processes, the legislature and a convention. The main difference is, whereas the U.S. Constitution, it's the states that request a convention. In Tennessee and California, it's the legislature that proposes a convention. But what's interesting is the legislature can propose a convention in California, but it still requires a 2/3 vote of the people in order to actually call the convention. Right? Now, if you live in California, this may be of more value, but I want you to compare how we're doing some of these things. Now, the other thing is, and this is really why I first put in California, because California has something interesting. The people in California can amend the Constitution by initiative. Now, initiatives are controlled by Article 2 of the California Constitution, but the people can directly go through the Albany 3. Not sure, Bob, what you know with Albany 3. Well, I haven't been to Albany in years. I missed some people up there, but so the idea is, if the people in California want to propose an amendment, they can do it by initiative. Now, what do they have to do to get an initiative on the ballot? Well, they've got to get signatures from 8% of the total votes of the last gubernatorial election. Right? Make sure I say that. You take a look at the last vote for governor. They have to get signatures from an 8% of that number. So if there were 1 million votes, or let's make it easy. If there were 1 million votes for governor, the last governor's election, they would need 80,000 signatures to get an initiative on the ballot. Now, I noticed something else California does. California has what are called referendums. The difference is, an initiative is to create a new constitutional amendment. A referendum is to pass a law, right? Then they only need 5% of the votes to do that. But here's what I found interesting. There's 2 things about this that bother me. And I know, oh, good, the people get involved. The people get involved. Yeah, there's 2 things that bother me. First of all, if all you need is 8% of the votes to get it on the ballot, well, actually, even that doesn't value. Here's my problem. Where's the deliberative process? Meaning, right? So let's say I moved to California. I'm not going, but let's say, and I want to amend the Constitution. So I write up an amendment to the Constitution, and I go out throughout the state, and I get signatures, and I figure out how many signatures I need, and I go through. I hit all the malls, I hit all the shopping centers, I hit all the events, and I get signatures. And as soon as I get enough signatures, that goes on the ballot, as I understand it. I'm the only one that's written the language. You've got a small group of people that are writing this language, and there's no real deliberative process. And what it means is you end up with some really goofy constitutional amendments. We'll talk a bit more as there's another state that has this problem as well. But while it sounds great, what California really has done is they're trying very hard to become a democratic state. And I don't mean democratic as in the Democratic Party. I mean a democracy rather than a republic. See, a democracy is when the people exercise the legislative powers directly. A republic is when they hire representatives. But look what we have here. In California, if I want to pass a law that makes wearing tie-dyed shirts illegal, all I have to do is I have to write it up. All tie-dyed shirts will be, after this date, all tie-dyed shirts will be illegal. If I get 5% of the people to sign it, because it's a law, not an amendment, that then goes on the ballot. And if 50% plus one of the people of California, I believe it's 50, I've checked the numbers, if enough people vote for it, that becomes the law. Well, okay, tie-dyed shirts is rather ridiculous. What if I wanted to pass a law that said it is illegal to use certain transphobic, quote unquote, transphobic language in the state of California? All I need to do is get 5% of people. And trust me, if you pay attention to what's going on in California, 5% should be easy. Hit any of the college towns, you'll get 5% and nothing flat. And if I get 50% of the people plus one to vote yes, your right to free speech, gone. Oh, but it's in the Constitution of the state. That's right. It's in the Constitution of the state, which means all I need is 8% of the vote to sign the petition, and it stands before the people. And your freedom of speech disappears. Now, if you're looking for the U.S. Constitution to protect you, we've got a First Amendment. Remember, the First Amendment starts out with Congress shall make no law. Congress didn't make this law. The people of the state of California did. Now, I didn't research it, but I bet you there's some pretty goofy laws in California and some pretty goofy amendments to their Constitution because we wanted a process that allowed the people, without stopping and checking and saying, wait a second, what about the rights of others? It's when I was going through California, that's what struck me was we are actually, California, not really surprising, they're trying to become a democracy. Josh says, that's craziness. Well, yeah, it is. But here's the interesting part. The Constitution of the United States requires that the federal government ensure that each state has a Republican form of government. I think it's Article 6, but I'm not sure off the top of my head. I'd have to look. So the federal government is required, the government of the United States is required to guarantee to each state a Republican form of government. And technically, California still has a Republican form of government, right? They elect representatives that pass most of the laws. They just want this democracy backdoor. And please always remember, my personal quote about democracy comes from Benjamin Franklin. My favorite: democracy is two wolves and a lamb voting on what to have for lunch. liberty is a well-armed lamb contesting the vote. So one other thing that I found in the California Constitution is a initiative, and I believe also a referendum, can only contain one subject. Again, made me think, why is this important? I assume this is important because, well, people tried to put multiple subjects on a single referendum. Kind of like those omnibus bills, those bills, that are 10,000 pages long that we keep hearing about, that cover 42 different subjects. They don't want that. And I think for very good reason. So if I think California becoming a democracy is a bad idea, at least limiting them to one subject per initiative is a good idea. That way, you can't say, well, I want everybody to have $15 an hour. We're going to make it a constitutional amendment that everybody gets paid at least $15 an hour. And then in the back of that say, yeah, but you're not allowed to speak about these things. Here's a whole list of topics you are no longer allowed to talk about in public. But I see everybody voted for it because it was the $15 minimum wage. They didn't talk about the other things that were done in the back. So I think that's a good idea as well. But hopefully you're starting to see different states have, and this is a good thing, right? All the states are different. We have different people, different histories, different backgrounds. I don't mind them being different. Let's learn from these. I learned that if somebody comes and tries to pass an amendment to the Tennessee Constitution to allow the people to directly pass amendments, because notice California is the only state so far of the two we've looked at where you can have an amendment to the Constitution that was never reviewed by the government. It wasn't proposed by the government. The government was completely uninvolved other than the fact that it happened during an election. Okay, next on my list, Florida. Why did I pick Florida? Well, I picked Florida for two reasons. One, my father and my stepmother and my sister live there. So I thought I'd like to know a little bit of what's going on down there. They also have they have an initiative process similar to California. Now in Florida, it's actually Article 11 of the Florida Constitution that controls amendments. Now, legislatures can propose an amendment, but this requires 3/5 vote of each house. So we've had half, we've had 2/3, now we've got 3/5. Right? So we see a higher bar, right? It's not simply one state, it's simply a majority, Tennessee, but the rest it's like, no, we need more. It's simply a majority in Tennessee, but you have to do it over two assemblies. California, Florida, we need 2/3, 3/5. We need a super majority. But Florida has something else that's interesting. See, every 20 years, there's a revision commission. So every 20 years, they have to call a group of people that lists out, it's the attorney general and this person, that person, the offices. And they go through and they look at what needs to be revised in the Constitution. Now, part of you thinks that's probably not a half bad idea. I look at that, but then again, I look at, to me, the bigger question is, who is on the revision commission? Who is looking at this and saying, that's not such a good idea? Because I guarantee you, if we had a revision commission for the U.S. Constitution, they'd be out to get the Second Amendment every time it met. It would just happen. They'd want to put limits on the First Amendment. They'd want to expand the general welfare clause. Right? So having it reviewed every 20 years is not a bad idea, but you got to make sure that the people that are reviewing it are in offices that are really, they know what they're doing, right? They understand that the Constitution is forming a government and it's there to protect the rights of the people, not to promote a political agenda, which is why I really don't trust putting it in the hands of politicians. Now in Florida, the people, the people can propose a convention. Right? The people can propose a convention. Now it requires a petition be signed, and this one gets a little tricky, by 15% of the voters from the last, of the 15% of the voters of half the congressional, let me try that again, 15% in half of the congressional districts and 15% of the total statewide of the last vote. So let me stop. I don't know how many congressional districts that Florida has. Let's say it's 10, just to make my life easy. And let's say in each of those 10 districts, there's 100,000 people. That means I need to get 15% of 100,000 people in which by the way is 15,000 people, in at least 5 of those 10 districts. All right. Now, because I did it evenly, the numbers all work out. But let's say, I've got 200,000 here and 50,000 there and 25,000 there. And that number also has to be at least 15% of the entire state. So it's a little convoluted, but we're still dealing with the same process. The main difference is you care about the congressional districts. And again, this is not a half bad idea because it makes sure that the interest is more than just the big cities. Right? You're not just going to go to Tampa. You go to Tampa and Miami and Orlando and get signatures of 15% of the entire state. But that doesn't represent 15%. That doesn't represent half of the congressional districts. You're going to have to go to other parts of the state. It's kind of like, again, the idea of using electors. The president can't simply campaign in New York, Los Angeles, Miami, Chicago, and win the presidency. They've got to go through multiple states. It's the idea of spreading that interest out. So that's actually a pretty decent idea. Right? Now, so that's to call a convention. If you want to call a convention in the state of Florida, you need 15% of half the districts and 50% of the entire state in order to call a convention to propose amendments. They then need a majority vote of the people to actually call the convention. All right. So you want to call a convention in Florida, you've taken half the districts, you got 15% of the signatures of the people, the count from the last vote in half of the district, it's 15% statewide. Now you can take that proposal and put it before the people at the next election. If a majority of the people approve, then you get your state constitutional convention. Okay. I know there is a method to my madness. Now, Florida also allows people to propose amendments. Again, signed by 8% of half the congressional districts and statewide. Right? So it's the same process, but only 8% instead of 15%. But here's the interesting thing. A state initiative cannot limit the power of the government to raise revenue. So you cannot have an initiative in the state of Florida to amend the Constitution to limit the state to collecting to a cost of living increase of no more than 2% per year. Right? You cannot do that. That can only be done through a convention. And again, to me, this looked like a little sneaky there, right? Yeah, all right, we'll let you propose amendments, but you cannot limit the power to tax, the power to raise revenue. The only way to do that within the state of Florida is to go through a convention. And again, limited to only one subject and matter per initiative. Now, I've listened to several people out of Florida. I don't remember the details, but I remember there is a constitutional amendment about how you treat hogs on a farm. Again, Florida has made the amendment process more democratic. Yay, democracy. No, boo, democracy. Because now you have these really, I want to call them goofy, but these really detailed pinpoint amendments. And because they're in the Constitution, if they're goofy, they're hard to change. Now, there's one other state I want to look at. So we looked at Tennessee, we looked at California, we looked at Florida. I want to look at Texas. Texas actually has the simplest of the four. The Texas Constitution, Article 17, says the legislature can propose amendments by 2/3 vote of each house. That's it. There's no option for the people to propose. There's no option for a convention. The only way to propose an amendment in the state of Texas is by a 2/3 vote of each house. Period. End of story. Quick, simple. Now, why is this important? We're back to the question of who can propose amendments. We see a lot of different theories in there, don't we? We have some states that say only government actors can do it. Some states say, well, we can have a convention, but the government has to be the one that decides to call the convention. We see the people can do it directly. We see, okay, we'll have a convention, but the people can actually propose a convention. There's a lot of different ways of doing this. Here's my thoughts on it. If I'm ever reviewing, like I said, I live in Tennessee. If I'm ever looking at legislation, at amendments to change how we amend the Constitution, I want a process whereby the government can propose amendments. Because, not by the way, because they're the government, because they're the creation of the Constitution. They are the entity the Constitution created, and if they need something changed to fulfill the duties we've asked them to fulfill, they should be able to ask for it. Now, I don't believe it should be a simple majority. I think it should be a super majority, 2/3, 3/5, something like that. Tennessee doing it over two assemblies, yeah, okay. I'm not sure. Part of me likes it because, the thing I like about that is, let's say you get a goofball assembly and there's some goofy amendment proposed and half the people vote for, half the assembly votes for it. We can turn around and say, you know what? That was really stupid. In fact, that was so stupid, that is worth firing you over. So we'll hire a new bunch of people and say, don't you vote for that. So my first thought is, that's not really great. I kind of warmed to the idea as I thought about it, because it means you have to take time. Constitution should not be changed for light and transient reasons. It should be a deliberative process. It should be difficult. It should require, because you're changing the basic rules. It's like changing the law of gravity, right? You should really consider how it goes. But I also want a process whereby the people can have a method of proposing an amendment as well. But I don't want that too simple either. I don't want people in the excitement of the moment proposing an amendment that's going to be really difficult to change. So I want it to be, we'll talk about voting for it later, ratifying in a minute, but I want it to be more difficult. I want it not to simply be, let me get a bunch of people to sign a piece of paper. If, I want something more. And maybe I don't have the perfect, I don't have the perfect answer, right? But I do think that as parties to the state constitutions, the people should have a method of proposing amendments. I just think it should be a little more difficult than what California and Florida are doing. I at least want there to be a process where time goes by, where people have a chance to discuss and debate and consider what are these amendments. So now we've gone through proposing. By the way, are there any questions? I haven't seen any new questions pop up for a while. Looks like a lot of the live streamers kind of got dumped. They disappeared, which is disappointing. But with that, let's talk a little bit about ratifying. See, all we've talked about is proposing changes. I did an article a while back about the Equal Rights Amendment and how they're trying to resurrect it, even though it's expired by its own language. It's a proposed amendment. It still has to be ratified. Now, where I like the idea of proposing amendments by both the parties to the Constitution, as well as the creation of the Constitution, ratifying the amendments needs to be limited to the parties to the Constitution. Right? Now, in the U.S. Constitution, again, under Article 5, the parties to the U.S. Constitution are the states. So in order for a proposed amendment to be ratified, it requires 3/4 of the states to ratify it. Now, that can be done either by a vote of the legislature or by a state convention. And I'm not entirely sure why. I haven't really researched it that deeply, but our founders said, you know what? We want Congress to determine whether it's going to be by the legislature or convention. And that's probably something I ought to spend some time on, because I haven't really thought about why. I haven't really researched why they decided to let Congress make that decision. Because that's the only role Congress has in, well, I mean, yes, they can propose, they can, you know, if the states want to amend the Constitution, let's say the states want to amend the Constitution because, gee, the federal government is out of control and they want to put it back in its place. They want to take a power away from that the federal government has been exercising. Let's say, I don't know, let's say we want to change the general welfare clause. We want to be more specific about what Congress can spend money on. Cool. Do you think Congress is going to want to do that? Do you think Congress is going to propose an amendment to limit its power to spend? I don't think so. Now, the states can get together, right? 3/4 of the states can get together and say, we want a convention. And in that convention, we're going to propose amendments that will, among other things, we're going to have one that's going to revise the general welfare clause. If enough states request it, the only role Congress has is to actually call the convention. They have no legal authority over the convention itself. They just say, okay, we're calling a convention. It's going to be in this place at this time. Go. But then once the amendment is proposed, Congress gets to determine whether it's the state legislatures or state conventions that will actually ratify it. So it's odd. Now, the Tennessee Constitution is ratified by a majority vote at the next gubernatorial election. All right, so we elect our governor every 4 years. It's not the next election, it's the next election for governor. It's going to be on the ballot for the next election for governor. So I'm trying to remember, I don't think our governor is up for election this year. Shows how much I've been paying attention. I've got so many facts bouncing in my head. So let's say we just elected a governor, and then we decide to propose an amendment. It's not the next election. It's the next time the governor's up for election. So you're only going to be able to approve amendments, to ratify amendments every 4 years in the state of Tennessee. Now, the state of California, it's a simple majority vote of the people, which again is where I think California gets to themselves in trouble, right? Because I can whip people up and get them all excited about an initiative and get them to vote, and 50% plus one vote for it. Voila. It's in the Constitution, people. Now, Florida is interesting. Florida, it requires 60% vote of the people at the next general election 90 days after the proposed amendment is submitted. In other words, there's got to be a 90-day window between the time the amendment is published, is submitted, and the election. So if someone were to go, if someone finally got it, they finally said, yes, here's an amendment for the state of Florida, and they did it today, it would not be voted on this year because there's got to be a 90-day window. Why? Well, my guess is so that people can read it and decide for themselves. I kind of like that idea. Florida, I like what you're doing here, right? You got 60% vote. It's a super majority. I'd like to see it a little bit higher, but you've got to have 90 days for the people to look at it. And then last but not least, Texas. Texas, it's a majority vote at the next election, but there has to be 50 days, minimum 50 days notice. They have to publish the amendment between 50 and 60 days before the vote, before the election, so that, again, the people can read it. So here are my thoughts about ratification. Ratification is only a function of the parties to the Constitution. Right? So in a state constitution, the people of the state are the parties to the Constitution. Therefore, they're the only ones that should ever be allowed to approve an amendment. Now, there was this person I was talking to was talking that there was some proposal to give the legislature the ability to approve an amendment. No, that to me is a non-starter. Ain't no way, ain't no how. You are a creation. You don't get to set your own rules. Right? That'd be like saying, and again, I live in Tennessee, right? It'd be like saying the Tennessee Titans, they get to write the rules when they play football in Nissan Stadium. They get to write no, it doesn't work that way. The rules have to be set by the parties to the Constitution. United States, it is the states that are the parties to the United States Constitution. So it's the states that ratify the Constitution, that make these amendments legally binding, make them legally part of the Constitution. Michigan resident. No, I am not familiar with the Michigan, but I'll tell you what I can do real quick. If you do a web search for the Michigan Constitution, I'll do a quick search for the Michigan Constitution. It would help if I could spell. And you're giving me a hard time. Why are you being so difficult? Michigan Constitution. There we go. So I find the Michigan Constitution, which looks like it was last written in 1963, which is a very good year because that's the year I was born. And if I look for, if I can type, Article 12, Amendment and Revision, and I take a quick look in here, it looks like we have an amendment by legislative proposal and vote of the electors, amendment by petition and vote. So it looks like in Michigan, and again, I haven't researched this deeply, but if I do a quick look, it looks like both the legislature can propose and the people can file a petition and vote on an amendment. So I'd need some more time if I were to go into more detail of that, but it looks like you have a petition process. And again, my issue with the petition process isn't so much that the people can ask for a constitutional amendment. It has to be involved enough that we don't start treating the Constitution like it's just a regular law, that we can change it willy-nilly whenever we feel like it. We really need to spend some time and say, do we really need to change the Constitution there? Are there any other questions bouncing around? That was from Tyler, by the way. Are there any other questions bouncing around about about amending the Constitution, state constitutions, federal constitutions? Anybody have any suggestions? Like I said, my general rule of thumb, what I've thought about when I was talking with my friend over this was both the government and the parties to the Constitution should be able to propose amendments. The requirement, there should be a certain moderately high bar to propose an amendment. Right? I don't want it to be simple. There should be, it should not be the equivalent of passing legislation. Only the parties to the Constitution should be able to ratify it. And again, it should be a moderately high bar. 50% plus one bothers me. Not so much because I don't trust the people, is I want it to be hard enough that people have really thought about it and really are behind it. because as we see, as I've learned anecdotally about California and Florida, they've got some really goofy amendments to their Constitution because it is so easy, relatively, to have their Constitution amended. So how are we doing out there, everybody? Oh, looks like Edmund joined the Zoom. I didn't see it, gentlemen. Hello there, Edmund. Questions? While you're doing your questions, I'm going to remind you again about the webinar this Saturday. I'm going to be covering a lot of good information. I'm probably going to have a couple people disagree with me. That's okay. Come listen to my evidence. I'll show where I get my information from. But for all the people, I've been asked questions. Is Nancy Pelosi going to be president on January 7th because states don't get their votes done in time? What happens if a state doesn't count their votes in time? What happens if there's a mail-in ballot problem? What happens if, could we? I'm going to discuss. Well, not necessarily, and I'll take the time to answer specific questions, but I'll go over the basics about why a lot of the hyperventilation I've heard lately really isn't warranted. We'll understand why we elect the president the way we do, why it's a good thing. And we'll also look at what the states have allowed to happen to the election that has truly made a mess. If there's any problem with the way we elect the president, it's what the states and the political parties in those states have done. So that's great. I'm still looking for questions. The couple things you can do to help. So there's as I said, I'm always looking for you to share this information. That's by and large the biggest thing. This is a something I love doing. It's a passion of mine to do these things. So I want other people to see it. I'd love to get my share numbers up, not because of the numbers, because I want people to see and hear, and I want people to have a place where they can ask questions. So share this. If you want to support this podcast, I've started doing live streams more often. People have said they like that. They like having it every other week. I kind of like it too. We'll see if I might expand it a little bit more as things get going. We'll kind of see, but that all costs money. The best way to make sure the Constitution Study podcast, the videos, the live streams, all that, the website keeps going, is you can help by donating at the website, constitutionstudy.com/donate, or go to the Constitution Study, hit the donate button. Anything you donate there, it can be a one-time, it can be a recurring. Anything you donate there goes to keeping the podcast going. It pays for hosting. It pays for the software that I need. It pays for the equipment that I need. I don't take a dime of it. It all is set aside and it's used for that. I appreciate that greatly. If you can't afford it, I understand. We don't all have money to spend on these things. Just sign up for the newsletter, right? Just click to sign up for the newsletter. Put your name on my list. I send out once a month. This is what's going on. Here's the news and whatnot. But it's also where it's one of the first places I communicate what's going on, right? So I have my scholars, which I'll talk about in a minute. I talk with them, but the next place I announce it's usually on the newsletter. So if you want to know when I'm going to be in a location, if you want to know where I'm speaking, if you want to know what events I'm going to be at, the newsletter is the best place to do it. If you want to know what new things are coming out, new products and whatever, that's the newsletter's place to go. And again, it's one email a month. Go to the website, click that button, or just go to constitutionstudy.com/newsletter. Those both help greatly. And then the next thing you can do is you want to help me. All right, so I've talked about supporting the podcast. If you want to support the work that I'm doing, if you want to help me continue, I have a couple new ideas for books I'd like to work on. I'm trying very hard to get out and meet people face to face. I love talking with people in person. Zoom is great, but it's not the same as seeing people face to face, shaking their hands, talking to them, looking them in the eye, and answering their questions. But that takes money for me to travel. And So my general rule of thumb is I will travel anywhere in the US. I'd probably expand that to Canada. Don't know why, but I would. But I want if they can cover my major travel expenses, right? Flights, hotels, cars, stuff like that. Well, if you support the work that I'm doing, I can help defer those costs. I would love to be able to take these groups, homeschool groups, civic groups, educational groups, heck, just a group of parents would love to have me come talk to their kids. And I'd love to not have the cost of travel be a part of that. Right? Now, the best way you can do that is by going to the store and buying something. You can buy a book. I've got ebooks on there for like $3, $5, $10. You can buy the big book. It's $25 for the Constitution study. That money goes to help me continue the Constitution study. The other thing you do is become a member. My Constitution Scholars, the group is still kind of getting its feet under it, but this is where we get together to really spend time understanding the Constitution. Now, the nice thing is if you're a scholar, you get access to a whole library of my digital materials. Most of my books, my classes, my webinars, I put up on the website dedicated to the scholars. You get access to it as part of your membership. Done. Right? You also get access as a Slack channel, a Slack site where you can come and we can chat with each other. We can set up online events or in-person events that are scholar only. It's also, you get better access to me, right? If you go to Slack and if you chat me a message on Slack, I'm more likely to jump in on. So that's a great way if you want to support the work that I'm doing as a whole. Buy a book, buy a t-shirt, right? Or consider becoming a member. The scholars are $5 a month or $50 a year, and that covers everything you want for that. So those are my asks. That is what helps me go. That's what helps keep this going and helps keep me going. So I got a couple questions popped up here. What effect does or could one state's constitution have on another? Precedent. Legally, one state's constitution has absolutely no effect on any other state. Precedent is a judicial term, not a constitutional term. Right? So just because one state does things one way doesn't mean all the states have to do it the same way. The closest thing you have to that is the full faith and credit clause. So let's say you pass let's say Tyler, I don't know, you're in Michigan, Tyler. So let's say Michigan decides they're going to issue driver's licenses to illegal. They pass a constitutional amendment that says we're going to issue driver's licenses to illegal immigrants. The only effect that has in other states is other states are required to recognize that that's a license. Yep, that's a Michigan license. What do I do with it? That's not there, right? So, and again, it's a good thing. Part of the beauty of a union of states is recognizing the people in New York. I'm going to use me as an example, right? The people in New York are different than the people in Tennessee. I don't know if you notice this, but they are. And if New York wants to do things a certain way, that's fine. I really didn't like the way New York, the residents of New York, the citizens of New York were running their state. So I went somewhere else. I went to Tennessee. Why did I pick Tennessee? Because I went to a website that rated freedom in the 50 states, and Tennessee was third, but it was warmer than the other two states. I believe the other two states were North and South Dakota. And I'd lived in the Northeast all my life. I'd had enough of winter. That's why I ended up in Tennessee. So we allow this diversity. We allow to say, if you want to have a more regulated state, if the people of that state, that's what they want, they can have that without impacting what we do. What actually impacts other states more than amendments to their constitution are their expats. So there's a really big problem right now where you have California residents that are leaving California and dragging California with them. Meaning, they hate what's going on in California. So they leave California, they're moving to Arizona, Texas, Utah, and then they vote in the exact same things they just left. Now, I saw this again when I lived in upstate New York. We had people from New York City that would move to upstate because they wanted to get out of the city. They wanted to live in a nice, quiet, peaceful farming community. And then they would try to change that community to be more like the city. It's not the constitutions that change it. It's the people when they move that change it. So let's see. What should happen if a state constitution is in conflict with the Constitution? By the Constitution, I believe you mean the Constitution of the United States of America. Two things you need to know. The short answer is the Constitution of the United States is superior to the state constitution. Article 6, Clause 2 says the Constitution of the United States, laws of the United States made pursuant to the Constitution, treaties made under the power of the Constitution, are the supreme law of the land. No law or state of a regardless of any law or state law or state constitution. But here's the problem, and this is a problem I see a lot. We've got this theory called dual sovereign. And the classic example, I'm going to give you a perfect example. And I'm going to pick on firearms because I love guns. Most states have a law that said if you were convicted of a felony, it is a crime for you to possess a firearm. Now, different states have different rules about when you can get that right back. But in general, if you've been convicted of a felony, most state laws say it is illegal for you to be in possession of a firearm. By the way, there's also a federal law that says it is illegal for a convicted felon to be in possession of a firearm. Now, this is allowed because of this concept of dual sovereignty. The problem is we don't legally have dual sovereignty. The 10th Amendment says any power not specifically delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by the Constitution to the states, remains with the states, respectively, or to the people. So if I have, here's some of my books. Here are all the powers that exist, right? I've got the power to tax. I've got the power to declare war. I've got the power to regulate healthcare. I got it all in here. Now, the states, when we created the states, we gave them all these powers. The states then said, we're going to create a United States, a union, and we're going to give them some of those powers. We'll give them some more of these powers. You notice what you don't see? With the exception of taxation, I can't think of much else. I'm sure there is, but I can't think of it off the top of my head. There are no powers that are legally possessed by both the state and the federal government. When the states gave the power to declare war, to fund the militia, to coin money, to maintain post offices, that is no longer a state function, that is a federal function. It is no longer within the jurisdiction of the state. That said, since the states did not give up the power to regulate commerce within the state, to deal with public health, to deal with transportation laws within the state, they rest only with the state. The federal government has no legitimate authority. Now, here's where we get into the problem. The states have allowed the federal government to encroach on their power. I just recorded a video, it'll be going up Monday, talking about Heller. Sorry, not Heller. No, I'm thinking of something else. I'm sorry, getting all my stuff. I just recorded a video where I talk about where the states have allowed the federal government to take their power. They've allowed the federal government to come in and take their rights. And we, the people of the states, really need to stand up and tell, actually, it's what I just recorded for Obergefell. we, the citizens of the states, need to remind our employees in our state governments that we have given them power and rights. They have the right to exercise certain powers. It is their job to defend those rights from federal encroachment. They haven't been doing it. We need to stand up and force our state governments to begin protecting their rights. You go back to, this really started in big time in 1913 with the 16th and 17th Amendments, but it keeps getting worse. So again, with the exception of the power to tax, and I cannot think of much else, there really isn't a place where the state and federal constitutions overlap where they can be in conflict. 99 and 44, 100% of the time, if there's a conflict between the state and federal government, it's because the federal law was passed not pursuant to the U.S. Constitution. And if a law is passed repugnant to the Constitution, it is void. I've been saying this now for 2 years, and I'm going to keep pounding it in people's heads. A law repugnant to the Constitution that created that entity, the commission of that entity, is void. Alexander Hamilton in Federalist 78, Chief Justice Marshall in Marbury versus Madison, for those of you who love the Supreme Court, both agree that a law repugnant to the Constitution is void. So if you have a federal law that encroaches on state law, on state constitutions, in violation of the 10th Amendment, then that law is void. Now, we go around like the emperor who has no clothes and say, well, you know, federal law is supreme. No, federal laws made pursuant to the Constitution are supreme. Now, there may be areas where we can disagree, especially like the general welfare clause. But in general, there are very, very, very few points when they legitimately could even possibly conflict. So, Tyler, I hope that answers your question. It is one of my hot buttons because it inverts the power structure. It says the federal government gets to tell the states what the states can do, when in actuality, the states tell the federal government what it can and cannot do. And they've stopped doing that. So, any more questions before we call it a night here? It's about 23 after 8 my time. I said I'd go until about 8:30. I mean, I'll go longer if there are questions, but at the moment, it looks like we are just about done. So let me talk about wrapping up a little bit here. If somebody pops in a question, I'll give it an answer. I hope you're enjoying these things. The live streams, the videos, I hope you're finding them helpful. I hope you're finding them useful. For the most part, I really enjoy putting them together. My wife will tell you, you know, usually Monday I sit down and I try to figure out what I'm going to write for the next week. And I do the research and I write the articles and I do all that stuff. And I enjoy it. And I've been doing it full time now for about 2 years. And I want to keep doing it. It's not easy, but I want to keep doing it. And part of it is you guys coming in and being part of it, right? It's whether it's just being here on a live stream or watching the videos or sharing or commenting. I try to answer all the comments. That helps keep me going. If you buy stuff, that helps keep the lights on and stuff. But this helps keep me engaged, and I enjoy it. Tyler apparently just recently found the podcast. Tyler, I'm glad. I hope you enjoy it. I hope you enjoy it enough you spread the word. I kind of go through fits and peaks. I keep track of how many people download the podcast, how many people view the videos, how many people visit the Facebook page. But I want this information out. I think it's really worthwhile. And to me, the best way, I just got interviewed last week by a gentleman. His wife listened to the podcast. His wife found my podcast, listened to the podcast, liked it so much, She showed it to her. She pointed her husband to it. Her husband liked it so much, he came and interviewed me on his live podcast, his live stream. So that type of sharing really helps get the word out. And I love when people start seeing things they hadn't thought of before, and we start having really thoughtful conversations. So I enjoy this. I hope you'll spread the word. I hope you found this valuable enough that you'll spread it, but you'll also be here. Because, again, the live stream today got a little off to a bumpy start, but I think this is a nice way for the interaction to be a little more engaging, right? It's a lot nicer if my assumption is if you ask a question and I can answer it, that's pretty cool. If you join the Zoom call, in other words, if you go to constitutionstudy.com/live and you register and you get the Zoom call, we can actually have a conversation because I can put your audio up and we can actually talk. So, that would be great. Okay, here's a question. Edmund Hyde asks, what happens if an amendment is passed that changes the outcome of prior legislation? I'm going to make an assumption, Edmund, that let's say, I'll pick a piece of legislation. Well, here's a perfect example. The Federal Department of Education is illegal. So if we were to reinforce that through another constitutional amendment, then any laws related to that disappear. They become invalid. Now, for practical reasons, what would happen? Technically, what would happen is the courts would no longer recognize the previous legislation. And again, this is for the U.S. Constitution or state constitution. In Tennessee, we have laws about carry permits. And I just went to a meeting. We were talking about self-defense laws, so it's on my mind. If we were to pass a constitutional amendment that changed the requirements for the carry permit, that law should no longer be applied in the state courts. Now, for practical purposes, what should happen is there should be a time frame to phase in any changes. But state constitutions supersede state law. A state law that is in violation of the Constitution is void. Practically, we need to have a way, we need to recognize the need to allow a transition time. But if you just say, this legislation that was passed, we now say we're not going to have a constitutional amendment that says that's illegal, or we're going to change that, the courts need to abide by the Constitution over the state law. And again, you can go back to Marbury versus Madison. You can hit the website. I just search for Marbury. I did an article about the truth behind Marbury versus Madison, and you can answer a lot of questions from that. What has worked best in terms of telling our employees? I will definitely spread the word. Okay. Tyler, here's what I found. My mother, many years ago, told me that I would attract more flies with honey than I would with vinegar. So what I recommend, first thing I recommend is you should have, especially with your state rep and your state senator, you should have a passing acquaintance with them. You should have their phone number, their email, and you should communicate with them regularly. I try to meet with mine at least once a year. I haven't been able to do it the last couple of years because of scheduling issues, but you should not be a stranger to your state employees. You should, and part of that needs to just be, and I don't mean going in and arguing them. What I like to do is I like to go in and I said, when I moved to Tennessee, I set up a meeting with my state rep, my state senator, and they said, why? I said, I want to talk. About what? I don't know yet. I asked them, what are your concerns? What are your issues? Start with asking them what their concerns are. Get a feel for what's going on. In the conversation, express your understanding that They're your employees. They work for you, and that you're going to judge them when it comes time for their employee evaluation, i.e. re-election. You're going to judge them on their oath to support the constitutions of the United States and of your state. Set that in a non-confrontational conversation. Take them out to breakfast, take them out to coffee, whatever. The next thing is, when there's something going on, when they do something wrong, or when there's a vote coming up and you think they're on the wrong side, don't yell at them. Ask them why. You'd be surprised. Most of these, again, understand, most politicians, the only time their constituents come and talk to them is when they're mad at them or they want something from them. You go to them, hey, I don't always agree with my state politicians. I emailed them, I contact them, and I ask them, why did you vote for this legislation? Why are you worried about this? Why? Explain to me, because I'm not in their shoes. There are things I'm not going to understand. It also helps disarm and diffuse situations. Then you can get into the conversation saying, well, wait a second, is what you're doing a violation of your oath of office? They're required by law in their oath to swear or affirm support for the Constitution of the United States. By the way, most state constitutions require them to swear to support both the Constitution of the United States and of their state. If you know the Constitution of the United States and you know the Constitution of your state, and you can point to them, wait a second, how is this supporting your oath to support the Constitution? Those difficult discussions become a lot easier when you've laid the groundwork. If you just walk in and start yelling and screaming, they don't hear you. You're just a number in a spreadsheet that says, yep, this person doesn't like it. If you begin to get a relationship with them, I'm not saying you have to become best buds, but if they recognize your email enough that they'll respond to it, if their office knows your name enough that when you call, you actually will get you'll get a chance to talk to them, then you can have those conversations. And I think the goal should not be to beat them up, but to educate them. And hey, it's not perfect, right? I've got my state rep, we're having a bit of an issue because I'm not getting contact, I'm not getting emails back, and I got to work on that. But I had a really great meeting. I don't know where you, let's see, Tyler, I'm not sure where you live, other than in Michigan somewhere. I had a meeting with my sheriff. Now, sheriff is another one of my employees. He is elected officially as the chief law enforcement officer of the county. Now, what's funny is I was at a county meeting and I saw him, and I'd never met him before. And I said, I've been meaning to call your office. I want to sit down and talk with you. He goes, why? And I explained a little bit about what I do. And he said, oh, you want to have a class? No, I want to talk to you. I want to hear what your concerns are. I want to explain to you what my concerns are. I want to make sure that we're on the same page so that if we need to get in contact over something serious, that's not our first engagement. He goes, okay. We sat down. We talked for about 45 minutes. We had a great talk. I became much more comfortable with him because there were two things that we agreed on that were great. One is I said, listen, my main concern is if I pick up the phone and dial 911, whatever deputy shows up, I want to make sure he or she understands their job is to protect my rights and that of my family and all the other individuals involved. They're not to be a state shill. They're not to be a federal shill. They're there to protect the rights of the citizens. He goes, that's right. That's absolutely. And he told me some great stories, and it was great. Excuse me. The other thing I said to him is, listen, here are my skills. If you need help, what can I help you with? Right? So it's got to be a two-way street. I said, if someone does a stupid gun ban and you decide to say no, if you are upholding the Constitution, I will stand with you. You want me to stand with you at a press conference? Let me know. You want me to stand with you when you want to sit next to you and defend you, if you're called before the state legislature, I will go. If I'm going to ask you to stand up for me, I have to be willing to stand up for you. So that was one part. The other thing he said that was great is, I said, listen, after about 40 minutes, I've taken plenty of your time. He goes, no. I work for you. My time is yours. That's the attitude I want. If you can begin to develop that relationship, because the thing that happens is the employees who don't view themselves as public servants, as employees of the public, they're the ones you want to identify and say, well, how do I get them out? Give them fair warning. I'm going to judge you on your oath to the Constitution. I'm going to judge you by your oath of office, your fidelity to the state and federal Constitution. And if I find you unqualified, I will not only not vote for you, I will do everything within my power to find somebody who will abide by that oath of office. So I hope that sort of answers the question. It's like a lot of things. It's simple, but it's not easy. It's really scary that first time you call up and say, I want to talk to my rep. I want to talk to my sheriff. I want to talk to my senator. But it really does help. And trust me, it is a lot easier to do that with state and county and local employees than it is with federal. But the interesting thing is state employees are most likely the ones that eventually end up federal employees. You look at most of the people in the House and the Senate and in the executive branches, they used to work in state governments and in local governments. So with that, I think I'm going to close it out for the night. Thank you, everybody. I'm sorry we had the bumpy start at the beginning, but I want to thank everybody for joining me. I want to thank those who were able to hang in here. I'm hoping you'll spread the word. I'm hoping you found this worthwhile. And I really hope I'll see you here the next time we get together in 2 weeks live on the Constitution Study. Have a great night, everyone.